Man?
Really good, Cody. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, totally. Well, the Colts made a splash, not at the beginning of free agency, but near the end of the day today, signing Devin Funchess out of Carolina to a 1-year, $10 million deal, up to $13 million max. And, Luke, I'm kind of curious, what are your opinions on Funchess?
I think it was a really surprising signing in the sense that I'm not sure really anyone predicted that he'd be the guy the Colts would necessarily seek out in free agency. I do think it's a very unique signing at 6'4", 230 pounds. I mean, he's really that big body receiver that I know a lot of Colts fans have been clamoring to pair with a T.Y. Hilton. And it also gives Andrew Luck another big red zone target. I mean, we already have Eric Ebron, but that's another guy that can go up and get it. And I think he has youth. I mean, he's 24 years old. He's always had the physical ability and the measurements that you like to see from a receiver. He just hasn't quite been able to put it all together. And maybe playing with, a more accurate quarterback like Andrew Luck and probably more of a traditional pocket passer, not to say Andrew Luck can't move, and Cam Newton, who's probably more of a bit of a freelancer, a little bit more of a scrambler out of the pocket passer. I mean, I think that could also help Funchess because you never know. I mean, some receivers really thrive in that kind of system where a quarterback will improvise and, throw it on the move or do whatever. And other receivers really do well with more of a traditional quarterback. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on it, Cody?
Yeah, definitely. I was part of me was like looking at what is the biggest factor. Because, I mean, I looked at 2017, 63 catches, 840 yards, 8 touchdowns. That's pretty good. And then I look this year, and he has kind of a drop-off year, 44 catches, 549 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So I guess it ultimately comes back to, was it partially due to, Cam Newton not being healthy the entire year, or was it a regression year for him? I guess I don't really know. I haven't looked into Funchess much. But certainly at 6'4", 225, 230, he definitely, on paper, complements T.Y. Hilton very well. And I honestly think that, it's kind of like a 1-year deal, so it's, obviously a prove-it deal. But this kind of gives me kind of reminds me a little bit of Eric Ebron deal last year. I know Eric Ebron obviously got multiple years on his contract. But you look, it's a young guy. I think Ebron's 24, 25 as well. Big guy, physical traits, the kind of receiver that Chris Ballard really loves, has all the talent in the world. And so ultimately it's like you said, Luke, he just hasn't put it together yet. And so maybe Indianapolis in the change of scenery there is going to be good for him. And, going from Cam Newton to an Andrew Luck would be good for him as well. And so I guess I'm also curious, Luke, does this affect the Colts moving forward in free agency, maybe looking at a wide receiver? Because I know they also tendered Chester Rogers and Marcus Johnson as well. And also, as far as the draft goes, does it impact where they look in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as free agency goes, I would probably think they're probably more or less done as far as receiver is concerned, especially as like you said, you still have – I'm sure they probably want to bring Dontrell Inman back. So, I mean, I think that's probably the other free agency move you have, but it's not necessarily a big splash signing quite like this was. But then I think in the draft, it probably deprioritizes wide receiver a little bit. I know a lot of fans were probably looking at a wide receiver with either that first-round pick, maybe that early Jets second-round pick the Colts traded for right before last year's draft. And it's not to say the Colts won't draft a receiver. I mean, I think they probably still should at some point, but maybe that's less of a priority where you're talking about, rounds 3 to 5. They still have Deion Kane, who's essentially a rookie, also coming back from a torn ACL. And I think he could really be a big contributor this season as far as, a down-the-field presence to kind of complement T.Y. Hilton on the other side. So I don't necessarily know that it stops the Colts from making a move at wide receiver, but I would be surprised if they do anything more in free agency than besides re-signing Inman. And in the draft, I think you're looking at more probably around 3 to 5 wide receiver if they add a guy as opposed to round 1 or 2 that we were probably expecting with right before this signing.
Yeah, definitely. And then as far as the guys that they brought back, I think Chester Rogers – he might have been a little bit of a surprise that the Colts tendered him, considering, he had a decent season last year, but I think ultimately I was kind of surprised that the Colts brought him back. I don't know. I guess I'm curious on your thoughts on him. I'm bringing back both Rodgers and Marcus Johnson.
Yeah, I think Chester Rogers has really been at times you look at him and you say, wow, this guy has all the makings of a wide receiver too with some of the catches. And I know 2 years ago I felt like a lot of Colts fans were a lot higher on Rodgers. And then you have other games where he's an enigma or he'll drop some passes. So, I mean, I'm okay. And I think Chester Rogers as the number 3 or number 4 receiver is fine. It's just I'm glad the Colts have brought in insurance here in Devin Funchess, where we're not counting on it. We're not penciling in Chester Rogers to be the number 2 wide receiver this year. I think in a number 3, number 4 capacity is really good. And I know Frank Reich is really high on Marcus Johnson from even his time with the Eagles, I believe. And he looks like a guy that has the size. It's unfortunate that he had that season-ending injury because I think he was really starting to catch fire and really starting to assert himself among kind of the wide receiver core. And it was almost similar to kind of Zach Pascal towards the end of the year where I thought Pascal ended up elevating himself past Ryan Grant and had those, that big catch against the Texans in the postseason. And that easily could have been someone like Marcus Johnson before the injury. So I'm interested to see how he progresses and continues to develop as a young wide receiver because I do think there's spots lower on the depth chart definitely for the taking from that 3 to 5 spot on the Colts roster there.
Right, and that kind of leads me to my next question. I was going to ask, do you think like the intrigue of a Marcus Johnson and a Deion Kane maybe hinders the Colts from investing a decently high, draft pick or a certain amount of money into a free agent into 2019 and beyond?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I think Chris Ballard had a quote earlier this offseason where I think he said, "Don't forget about some of our younger guys either." And granted, that could have just been a decoy in free agency. But I also think he genuinely does have confidence and trust in some of these younger receivers. I think there's some merit to it. I mean, a lot of these guys have flashed at moments. Whether Zach Pascal had that big touchdown catch against the Texans. Dontrell Inman was a stud pretty much from midseason on. So I do think these guys have some talent, and yeah, I mean, maybe I think the Colts want to probably see another year what they have with these young guys, and also see what they have with Funchess because, of course, he's on a 1-year, roughly $13 million deal, and hopefully some of these guys can really assert themselves and really solidify the position because we always haven't had that consistent producer next to T.Y. Hilton since really Reggie Wayne last played here.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the Colts also retain safety Matthias Farley, center Evan Bain, backup center. And they also, I think they offered it to Luke Rhodes, long snapper as well. I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on those 3 guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think Matthias Farley was really a big addition. I mean, he's a starting caliber safety that just so happened to be our 3rd safety a lot, but I think we saw him a lot at nickel packages. Seems like a strong locker room guy, too. Special teams work. So I think Matthias Farley really is a nice addition. I think with the durability concerns that you still have with Malik Hooker a little bit and, of course, Clayton Geathers, I think the Colts really need a 3rd safety that's capable of starting and playing at a high level. And assuming if Matthias Farley's fully recovered, I definitely think he can be that guy again. As far as Evan Bain, he played really well as a center in relief of Ryan Kelly last year. I mean, he wasn't nearly as good as Ryan Kelly, but of course you don't expect that from a guy that's, is essentially signed off the street as opposed to a first-round pick. But I thought he came in, he held his own, and most importantly, when he was out there, you really didn't notice him. And I think that's really the key to an offensive lineman is when you're noticing them, aside from maybe when Quentin Nelson is pancake smashing people into oblivion.
Right.
I think it's a good thing when you don't notice an offensive lineman for the most part. And then Luke Rhodes, I think, is a very good long snapper. I think having him, he didn't have the traditional route to a long snapper. I think he was a linebacker, but he's really athletic. He's quick. And I think if he can do it just as well as, your sort of long snapper that isn't quite always, the best athlete, I think having a linebacker in your coverage unit, so when he hikes it, he can get downfield and tackle. I mean, I think that's a big addition because it's essentially improving your coverage unit because you have a linebacker instead of, kind of a fifth string tight end type or a long snapper that's not necessarily taught how to tackle properly or, isn't necessarily the fastest guy out there.
For sure. Luke, I guess I'm curious. I know you started writing recently for Stampede Blue. Do you have any articles that you want people to check out that you think would be good for this time of year, free agency?
Sure. So I had an article that got published today that was the top 7 sleeper free agents available for the Colts. So some under-the-radar players that I think the Colts could potentially be interested in, given Chris Ballard's historical trends in the past 2 free agencies prior. So I think that would be a great article. And as far as I know, none of those guys have been signed yet, so it's still very much current. So I think that would be a great article for Colts fans to check out.
Yeah. All right, one more question for you, and then I'll let you go. So if you had the choice right now of any of the free agents available, who would you want for the Colts and why?
Right now, that's a tough one, Cody. I actually really like the idea, and this might just be my flavor of the night or something, but I really like Earl Thomas as a potential safety. Just looking at Chris Ballard's track record so far, he likes signing guys to 1 to 2 year deals. I think you could potentially maybe get Earl Thomas, who's 29, on like a 2-year deal. I mean, I'm sure the annual value of that deal would probably have to be pretty high, but I think he's a great veteran leader. He's one of the best safeties to play, in the past decade or so. I think he still has plenty left in the tank. So as far as an addition on the field and in the locker room, I think he'd be a great addition. Now, if Matthias Farley comes back, though, that probably means Clayton Geathers is probably out and Earl Thomas replaces him. So that'd probably be the one downside of the move, because I know Clayton Geathers was the team captain last year for the Colts, but Earl Thomas has always been a captain for the Legion of Boom. So I don't think you'd lose much in the leadership department, and I think you'd probably ultimately get the superior player at safety. So that's sort of what I'm thinking right now, but we'll see. And I think there's a lot of work left to go. I mean, I think you also have to look at like a Justin Houston on a 1 to 2 year deal as a veteran pass rusher from the Chiefs would be a good addition, I think. I know the Colts have been flirting with C.J. Mosley, who I think would probably be, great. He's a great overall linebacker to really pair with Darius Leonard. And while they still have Anthony Walker, who's had a really good season last year, I mean, you're still improving your linebacking corps by adding Mosley. And I don't know if that means whether Walker or Mosley would have to play the Sam, and one of those guys would be kicked out from playing middle linebacker, so to speak. But I think either way, you're definitely improving the second level of your defense, and Mosley's a heck of a player.
Yeah, definitely. I saw that the Colts were pursuing him. I don't know how true these rumors are, but I saw the Colts were very interested in him. I guess one question I had with Earl Thomas, now that you mentioned him, how different is he than, say, Malik Hooker? Because I know they're both known as kind of ball-hawking guys. What are the different traits? Because I think whenever I think of Earl Thomas, I kind of think, okay, that guy's kind of, a free safety. But if Malik Hooker's already playing free safety, what would the point be of signing Thomas at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is a passing league, so I don't necessarily know that, the distinguishment between strong safety and free safety is as important these days. I think safeties can play pretty interchangeably. That's not to say that having a strong safety who can play as, kind of that enforcer in the box still isn't valuable. I mean, clearly it is if Landon Collins is making an absurd amount of money from the Redskins in free agency.
Yeah.
But I think Earl Thomas is a little bit different than Hooker. I mean, I think they're both definitely ball hawks and the kind of that Ed Reed prototype, but I think Earl Thomas is probably a little bit of a better tackler, so versatile that he can really play in that box when called upon. So I just think it would vastly improve the Colts' defense and secondary regardless, just having that type of player. I mean, who's a multiple first-team All-Pro, Pro Bowler, former Super Bowl champion, and would really help give this Colts defense an identity a little bit. I mean, I know we're fast, we're swarming, and we have some star power with Darius Leonard, of course, the reigning rookie defensive player of the year. But I think adding an Earl Thomas would really help solidify that Colts defense, give them another star, and really shore up that secondary.
For sure. We'll definitely have to see how it plays out. Thank you, Luke. I really appreciate your time, man.
Thanks, Cody. Anytime. Thanks for having me on.